Faza'il A'mal, More Trouble Than It's Worth, Part 13, TJ Eccentricity, Deception and Unfaithfulness.
The narration of hadith regarding the virtues of good, what is not established as authentic, which are weak hadith, as long as it is not known that it is a lie. If that hadith is fabricated, then even we say that fabricated hadith is not accepted at all.
We now continue with the topic of the critique of the FA. So here, Dr. Turkistany states on page 160, he mentions three words that I want to bring to your attention. The first is faithfulness, the second is deception, and the third is eccentric. So this is the world specialist on the FA, and a world specialist who has thoroughly gone through the literature and every edition of the book in existence, and this is how he describes it. So this is not specifically a critique of Sheikh Zakaria, but this is a critique of the movement, the cult of the TJ, and how they are dishonest in how they produce their material and their literature. And the point behind the whole series is so that they would have a critical look at their literature and hopefully remove it from circulation. So he mentions at the top of this page that the printers, they performed a type of deception because they added bits and they took bits out, and then they changed translations, and on other pages he mentioned that they changed the ordering of the Quranic verses, and as I've proven in other parts of this channel, they've actually misquoted the Quran, which is really unforgivable. Then he states at the bottom, and you should pause, read, grasp, apply, persist and achieve. That's why I leave this page for you to read. He states, the omissions include the sources of those ahadith and rulings and commentaries by the author himself, or others relating to whether the hadith is authentic or weak. Although it is an important issue, we find it is eccentric when this is repeated in different editions. So this strengthens the belief that these editions are nothing but replications. There's my proof for my claim. Unfaithfulness, eccentricity, and deception. Enough with the FA, enough with the TJ. So the thesis that I'm going to look at today is one that is absolutely superb. It's very well written, and of all the works I've read at all levels, articles, doctoral theses, magister theses, master's theses, this is one of the best ones that I've ever read. And it's written by a man called Scott Lucas, and he states, and he did a very thorough study of the biographical dictionaries, the Ilm al-Rijal, and I want to cherry pick certain parts that I found very important. But before we go to Scott Lucas, we find that Dr. Turkistany himself, he makes a statement about Rijal al-Hadith or Ilm al-Rijal. He says, this is on page 32 of his Birmingham University 2011 thesis. This can be understood by even those who have least knowledge of the sciences of Hadith, especially the sciences of Rijal al-Hadith, study of the reporters of Hadith, because this science deals with the dates of birth, death of reporters, the times of their education and journeys, and names of people who they reported from and who reported from them, and other information from which one can recognize the existence or non-existence of interruption of isnads. That's quite a neat little summary of what Ilm al-Rijal is, but for a much more detailed study of what Ilm al-Rijal is, we go to the work of Dr. Lucas. And Dr. Lucas's thesis is a lot bigger than Ilm al-Rijal, but this is what his abstract states. He says, our close reading of several early books of this genre has led us to the conclusion that the three fundamental principles upon which Sunni Islam was constructed were the collective probity of the companions of the Prophet, the discipline of Hadith transmitter criticism, and that's the topic that we're talking about, Ilm al-Rijal, and the implicit historical understanding of the 5-generation evolution of hadith transmission from the time of the Sahaba to the compilers of the 3rd, 9th century. So that's what he seeks to achieve. And what I seek to achieve is simply to extract the portion dealing with prosopographical or biographical or dictionaries of hadith narrators. That's the word that's the language that he uses. So he says on page number 8, and again, this is talking about that very famous scholar that I mentioned several times now, and it seems like every single author that writes on this topic of hadith, when they are writing within the Western tradition, they are always mentioning this individual called Joseph Schacht. Here he gives on page number 8 an excellent overview of the main academic responses to Schacht, and I don't want to make this series Schacht heavy, because Schacht's work has been responded to quite thoroughly in loads of different places, including the Chicago University thesis from 1991 of Dr. Iftikhar Zaman. He mentions Schacht as well. But here is just an overview of some of the responses to Schacht. The first alternative proposals and refutations of Joseph Schacht's theories were by Nabia Abbott in 1967 in Chicago. It's called Studies in Arabic Literary Papyri, Volume 2, Quranic Commentary and Tradition. Then another scholar, a Turkish scholar I believe, whose name was Fuat Sezgin, in Gesticht der Arabischen Schriftums, Volume 1, and that was in Leiden the same year, 1967. The former was based on her careful reading of books pertaining to the disciplines of hadith transmission and old papyri fragments that she had found. Then another author that I've mentioned, M.M. Azami, and the screenshot of the book is given in this series, on Schacht's Origins of Mohammedan Jurisprudence. And finally, the recent work of Harold Motsky, who used some of Schacht's ideas but actually applied them to hadith books instead of legal works. This has led him to the conclusion that much of the hadith probably does date back to the 1st Islamic century. And the work was the Musannaf of Abd Razak as a source of authentic ahadith of the 1st century, and that work was done in 1991. So that's like quite a decent overview. This part looks like it's going to spill over into 2 separate episodes because I haven't even got to Scott Lucas yet. But what I'll do for thoroughness is give you the screenshots of the work I'm going to go through, and in the next part I'll actually go through Scott Lucas's work. Another thing that I'll mention at this point, and this is just from the top of my head, there was an excellent article by a very famous scholar called Ra'il Halaq, and he gave a very thorough overview of the studies of the Western study of hadith literature, and I will endeavour to give you a screenshot of that as well. Please stay tuned for the next part, where we will continue dismantling the FA and we'll go to the works of Scott Lucas.